What's going on, people? It's Akala, how you doing? And I've got a couple of things. Well, really one thing that connects to many other things that I wanted to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about a song of mine, the meaning and ideas behind it, and how that relates to current day activism was inspired by some of those traditions, and how you can get involved in some of the things that are going on around it. So I wrote a song called Maangamizi on the Thieves Banquet, which some of you may know, some of you may not know. Maangamizi is a Swahili term, and it translates roughly to the same sort of concept or idea as the word Holocaust, as a racist, genocidal campaign of brutality towards a particular group of people. And in the Pan-African world, in the Pan-African tradition, the term Maangamizi refers to the entire process of colonialism, enslavement, neo-colonialism, the development of racist, anti-African, anti-black ideas, and their direct physical political manifestation. So that's what Maangamizi means. That's what it sums up. And if you listen to my song, I think you'll get a sense of the meaning and the ideology behind it. I must say it was inspired by, it didn't come out of a vacuum, it was inspired by, I went on a course with a lawyer called Esther Stanford Jose, who's a lawyer and activist who is a reparations lawyer, so someone who looks at reparatory justice. And I went on a course around the idea of reparations and the case for reparations from a legal standpoint. And I learned a whole load of stuff I had really no idea about on that course. And saw how solid actually the legal case for reparations is in a Pan-African context, which is one of the reasons the British state and other states will avoid directly apologising for Britain's role in transatlantic slavery and neo-colonialism and coups and etc. Because a direct apology from a head of state or from someone in a position of power would open, in a legal sense, from what I understand, would open up the conversation for reparations even more, which is why the language is always picked very carefully. People can express regret, but they can't apologise. And that's some of what I learned on this course, which was really fascinating to me. I learned about the amount of minerals that have been dug out of the African continent over the past kind of 500 years. I learned about even more mechanics around the way aid works and the kind of corruption behind that. I learned a little bit more about the fact that of payments, odious debt, if you like, the way that odious debt is still used as a weapon of war and neo-colonialism against those states, etc, etc, etc. I mean, it was a fantastic course where I learned so much, but I learned particularly about this idea of and struggle for Pan-African reparations and how it connects to other forms of reparatory justice around the world. Because of course, when you hear about Pan-African reparations, the mainstream media and a lot of our society would just be like, oh, crazy black people campaigning for something that ended hundreds of years ago. Why are they always whinging? You know how people are, very, very stupid. But when you look at the direct manifestations and the direct lineage, so if we look in American context, the direct lineage between the ending of slavery and then chain gangs and convict leasing and of course private prisons today, you can literally draw that straight line and see very clearly the legacy of that in America. If we take Brazil, the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery in 1888, and the policies that are outlined in Abdias do Nascimento's book, Brazil, Mixture or Massacre. From 1888 onwards, the Brazilian government had a policy that at the time they called getting rid of the black stain. It was an open policy of trying to get rid of that population of enslaved Africans that Brazil had become very scared of. We can see a direct lineage between the ending of slavery in Brazil in 1888 and the situation for Afro-Brazilians today in 2012. Police brutality, the fact that the overwhelming majority of that population, who are actually the majority of the population of Brazil, live in favelas, etc, etc, etc. That lineage is very clear. If we move to, say, Haiti, the first country in the world, as we've discussed many times before, to properly abolish slavery after defeating the French, the British and the Spanish. Haiti was invaded by America in 1915. A debt was placed on Haiti in 1825 by the French under threat of reinvasion to pay France reparations for Haitians gaining their own freedom, for robbing France of their property. That money was still being paid off post-World War II, so we're not talking about ancient history. To say nothing of the coups that have existed in Haiti, foreign-backed coups, as recently as 2004. So we can clearly see the legacies and current activity of racist neo-colonialism in a Pan-African context. So to think that these are ancient issues, especially with police brutality being so much in the news recently, is really quite ridiculous. But people would have you believe these are ancient issues and it's just crazy black people being mad. But even if we look at it from the perspective of workers' rights, you know, to use a kind of more well understood analysis, The worst form of worker exploitation of the past half a millennia, without question, in my mind at least, was the transatlantic traffic in enslaved Africans. The legacies of that in all of the places, both where Africans were taken from and where they landed, are still very, very clear in the living standards of people, and opportunities available, etc., etc., etc. So even from a perspective of workers' rights, a victory for Pan-African reparations is a victory for workers' rights anywhere in the world, and a victory for the redistribution of what, in my view, is ill-gotten wealth by a lot of the political and business elite of the world that we live in today. A lot of the powerful and rich corporations and peoples. So, for example, in a British context, the slave owners, not the enslaved people, the slave owners were given £20 million reparations at the end of slavery, which is equivalent to roughly 16 billion today, we're told. And of course, they invested that in various industrial projects in the UK, etc. And it's fascinating to the British public because that was your money they were given. Yeah, think about that. The owners and traffickers of human beings were given public money at a time when living standards for poor people in Britain were horrific. Nonetheless, they were given public money for the loss of their property over in the Caribbean. And their property, of course, was my grandmother's great-grandmother and other people of African heritage. It's fascinating because that was the largest public bailout until the bankers' bailout of 2008. So these things have very relevant contemporary manifestations, but the mainstream media and our universities and the way and the general obscurification, if that's the correct word, and I don't think I pronounced that word correctly, but it's funny, but the general making things hazy and making things unclear and avoiding facts and avoiding any real discussion around these subjects is one of the ways that people avoid what is a very clear context. So to give yourself some context, you could read Capitalism and Slavery by Eric Williams, you could read How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney, you could read The West and the Rest of Us by Professor Chinwezu, you could read Dead Aid by Adam Bisamuyo, you could read so many books that look at manifestations of neocolonialism and give you a historical context and a legal context. Visit stopthemaangamizi.com. One of the main reasons I came to talk to you was because there is a march on August the 1st around this issue, organised by the Stop the Maangamizi movement. Visit stopthemaangamizi.com and there's a petition there and more information. But I would suggest you attend the march on August the 1st, Windrush Square in Brixton. Why is this important? People always say, because I was one of these people, like many of you, that went for a period of life where I was frustrated with marching. I just thought, why march? It doesn't prove anything. It doesn't do anything. The state's not going to yield to the power of a march. All of which is true, but marches to me are about how you use them. Because as a kid, my mum took me on loads of marches. I went on the march to get justice for Stephen Lawrence. I went on loads of marches as a youth and saw those cases turn out for the worst. Saw the lack of justice, and so got really frustrated. But it's what Kwame Ture talks about, mobilization versus organization. Mobilization is very easy, and it is useful to mobilize, to march, to let off steam, to show the state that somebody cares is important. But then it's how you organize afterwards. So if you go on a march, did you take details while you were there? Have you organized with other people who have similar mindsets? Are you setting up community bank accounts to start providing the kinds of services that you believe in, that you feel there is a failure for? If you're a lawyer or a doctor or a paramedic or whatever you are, have you made your services available to those community organizations? So how are you using a march, not just to mobilize, to organize? And that's what I think should be the case even for this Stop the Maangamizi march. It's a very grassroots movement. It's inspired by other reparations movements around the world. It's connected with other people's movements around the world, from the Australian Aborigines to our brothers and sisters in West Papua, to all peoples that have been dispossessed and brutalized by racist imperialism and continue to be in the 21st century. So it's really, to me, an amazing movement, and a movement that needs many people's help and needs many people's skill sets and ideas and inputs. So I, again, would suggest you visit their website. But just to give you a sense of what they're trying to do and achieve, and that it's not just a march, I printed out some of the aims of the campaign, which I thought were really, really interesting. So I just thought I'd read them out because I tried to memorize them and it wasn't happening for me. So it's increase the recognition of and educate people about the Maangamizi, its causes, contemporary manifestations and consequences. Gather evidence of the continuing impact of the Maangamizi as part of the process towards establishing all-party parliamentary commissions of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice at the levels of the Westminster Houses of Parliament and the European Parliament. mobilize petition signers, supporters to organize a community of advocates for Stop the Maangamizi, catalyze the development of such a force into an integral part of the People's Reparations international movement. So it still has and still understands that Pan-African reparations is part of an international campaign for reparatory justice in the world. I would suggest people do a little bit more research and understand the principles and history of reparatory justice before they pass judgment and make a conclusion. And I also suggest that people go down on August the 1st to Windrush Square, link up with other people from the communities and other like-minded or non-like-minded people. If you're skeptical, go down and find out more. Go and ask the questions and gather more information and understand that reparations, reparatory justice, is one of the key components, in my view, of a march toward any form of global justice in the 21st century. StopTheMaangamizi.com. Big up, ladies and gentlemen. Catch you soon.